Hi, my name is Mpiyakhe Dhlamini. I'm doing my first solo live stream for my podcast for the FMF in Freedom Mazini Kululeko. So I thought I talk a bit about the alcohol ban, the newly reinstated alcohol ban, and what this means for South Africa, for the alcohol industry, and everyone else, the respect for law even. So one of the things that we found out on Sunday evening was that the alcohol is soon to be banned again because the cases in the country, the cases of COVID-19 have spiked, and government is worried that the alcohol is taking up too much space in hospitals, in trauma units, and so on. Because people tend to be more violent when they are drunk. They tend to commit more crime, more domestic abuse, and all of those things, more violence. But of course, it's not everyone. It will be a minority of people. Most people don't do that. Most people are perfectly happy to just drink and be peaceful, or hang out with friends and drink a little bit and hang out with friends and not too much, or just go to sleep, and it's not everyone who's a violent drunk, but of course, because of these few violent people, then the whole country has now to suffer. And also, just the justification itself seems weird. If you consider the earlier decision to reinstate the sale of alcohol after the 9-week lockdown, after 9 weeks without alcohol sales, the government decided to reopen alcohol sales in level 3 of the lockdown. Now, this is interesting because at the same time is that if you understand the trajectory of COVID-19 in South Africa, what was supposed to happen was we would go into lockdown, we would get the health system ready, we would flatten the curve. Originally it was just flattening the curve, but then it eventually became going into lockdown and also preparing the health system. And so we were supposed to be getting ready during the initial 3 weeks of lockdown, starting on March 26th. But it seems that didn't happen because in as much as the president on Sunday was saying that they've built new field hospitals, they've increased the number of hospital beds. There's a project with the CSIR to produce ventilators. Well, the project, by the way, is delayed. They were supposed to produce, I think it was something like 10,000 ventilators by the end of June, and then they failed because a large part of the reason, as I understand, was just regulatory issues, which is ironic on its own, because these people who are supposed to be these researchers, these brilliant engineers and so on, who are supposed to be part of the solution to the problem, were ultimately stopped by government regulations, and it was a government project. And so now the idea is that they will produce their first ventilators beginning of September, end of August, and which is what the president said on Sunday. Anyway, so that was the initial idea of the lockdown: flatten the curve, get the health system ready. And then the president seemed to imply that they had gotten the health system ready. He didn't actually say that, but he seemed to imply strongly that they had done a lot of work to get the health system ready. Whether they had achieved all their goals remains in the air. But now, another thing that was mentioned is that we'll now be introducing an antibody test, which is something that Professor Shabir Madi, who is one of the researchers on the Ministerial Advisory Council by the Department of Health, which is something that he had long ago suggested, and then the government, I suppose, didn't take it into play the first time around. So the stream has started, and I see there's no comments yet, but yeah. I'm sorry. First live stream, you see. So yeah, that's the state of play. That's where we are with the government basically reinstating this alcohol ban because of the spike in, I suppose, in hospital admissions, at the added pressure in trauma centers, in hospitals, and so on. But then they knew all of this before they reinstated before they they opened up the sale of alcohol again. They knew all of this. They knew that this is how South Africans behave when alcohol is for sale, when it's available for sale. This is how some South Africans behave when alcohol is available for sale. They knew that this is how the trajectory of the virus will proceed. So this is one of the things that was said on Sunday. Actually, the president actually said that they expected the current peak. So that South Africa is entering into an expected peak for the for the number of COVID-19 infections. And keep in mind that we are still. Let me just confirm that we are still at 4,172 deaths. So this is horrific. This is bad. Like the number of people died. There's a lot of people, but in comparison to some of the other things that kill South Africans, it would seem that COVID-19 is not out of the average or out of the ordinary. But anyway, back to the president. So by admitting that we are entering an expected peak, but then at the same time we have also decided that we are shutting down alcohol again, having opened it up before. What the president is saying is that basically this is not the ban. The newly reopened ban is not because of COVID-19, because it doesn't make sense. Think about it. Why would you reinstate a ban that you had previously had in place, and then decided that the ban was no longer necessary? Why would you reinstate that ban if we're entering a peak that was expected? So this is not a surprise. So this was an expected peak. This is what we've been talking about: delaying the peak, flattening the curve, all of these things. So this is not a surprise that we would enter an increased rates of infection for the virus. But now, what is a surprise is that the case fatality rates, the CFR, is actually lower than what was anticipated. I think it's 1.5% now, which was what the president said on Sunday. So this is given the fact that you have a case fatality rate that is less than expected, meaning that your actual peak is less severe than what you had anticipated. Then why would you reintroduce the ban on alcohol? I mean, knowing what kind of harm it has done to the industry. The CEO of the Beer Association of South Africa was interviewed by ENCA shortly after the president's speech, and basically what she said was the first 9-week lockdown has already done a lot of harm to the industry. More than 35,000 businesses closed down. I'm not sure if she was referring to only to the alcohol businesses or to businesses in general, but she said more than 35,000 businesses closed down in townships. So this is horrific just because of the lockdown, and it doesn't actually matter if it's just alcohol-related businesses or businesses in general, because there's 35,000 businesses lost. That's I don't know how many jobs that have been lost. And so these are some of the consequences of government decisions to go into the lockdown in the first place, and we are now dealing with those. And on top of that, we will still be dealing with the health consequences after this, after all of this has played out. And so by health consequences, I don't just mean the COVID-19 health consequences. I mean the things that we've ignored, the things we have forgotten about, like TB, like HIV/AIDS. There have been reports that the number of tests have gone down for both HIV and TB. And so these are things we'll have to deal with. And going after alcohol doesn't seem to make sense, because it's one of the things that will be providing the jobs that people will need to deal with some of the other social consequences of going into lockdown. And so it's something that doesn't seem to make sense on the face of it. It doesn't seem to warrant any justification by the government. It seems arbitrary, because what it has also done is that no one expected this. It was a complete surprise to everyone. It was a shock to everyone. People who would probably have gone and stocked up on alcohol if they had known. We had some warning, 1 or 2 days warning for the first lockdown, but this time around there was no warning at all. The government just declared, which is another point. They just declared with immediate effect that there would be no alcohol sales. But then another thing to consider with that is that when actually these regulations come into law, when the president makes a speech, or when the regulation is issued in the government gazette, when the regulation is published in the government gazette, and is available for citizens to understand and for people to study. So those are some of the things that are problematic with this ban, and it's going to harm not only the alcohol industry in South Africa, but also the the government finances themselves. One of the things that came out was in the original 9-week lockdown, 3.4 billion rands in excise taxes were lost just due to the lockdown. This was not due to the shutdown of sales. This was not the excise taxes that the industry itself would have paid but can't pay because of the shutdown. This was the excise taxes that were lost because of people who took over the job that had been done by the legal alcohol industry. So these are people who took who basically decided that since the government is shut down the sale of alcohol, then they would they would continue selling in the black market, which is another thing, because this is only going to promotes the free market, the black markets, which is in a way it's a good thing, because it's sort of it's an independent source of power for people. It sort of undermines some of the things that government will do, because people then have an independent source separate from the formal economy, which government controls to a large extent. And so people have been going more and more into the black market, alcohol sales, for alcohol, for cigarettes, and for all manner of things that were illegal during lockdown. And there is no reason to believe that this would stop after the lockdown. And so the government has created a problem for itself, and it's also facing all these fiscal issues. So at the worst time, informal businesses in general almost as a rule of thumb, they don't pay tax. So that's almost the thing that distinguishes the informal from the formal sector. The taxation, basically. They typically, you can't assess these businesses for tax. For one thing, they tend to be cash only businesses. So figuring out how much the business makes in revenue is a headache for government that they can't really get over. For example, tax is another example, because it's a cash only business. Like the government has to rely on what the taxi owner reports as income, and that's how they assess their taxes. But they don't actually know, because the person can basically do whatever they want with their money. So that's the advantage of being a cash only business, and that's one of the advantages that would be brought about with the wide adoption of cryptocurrency, which is another exciting thing that I hope to see more of personally, with all the I suppose the ructions happening around the world, all the commotion, all the disruptions. I would hope for a greater adoption of cryptocurrency, and I hope that it's something that we start moving towards, because governments have shown themselves to be irresponsible. They have shown themselves to be incapable of resisting the power they have of the control of the printing press. They've abused that power continuously, time and time again. More and more governments are now doing quantitative easing. Some governments have started experimenting with modern monetary theory. An example being the British, the Bank of England, which basically is controlled by the British government. So we are starting to see more and more of these negative things, and I would hope for a greater adoption of crypto, and here in South Africa as well, because we are seeing the growth of these informal markets, or black markets, whatever term you would like to use, in alcohol, in cigarettes, in tobacco, even in that's another thing that's not mentioned, even in vapes. Because the government also, along with the ban on tobacco, they also banned vape juice, which doesn't make sense, because you would think that would be the ideal opportunity for them to sort of promote vaping at the expense of smoking tobacco, which is something I don't approve of, by the way. I don't want government promoting one particular product over another. I don't think that's ever ends well, because that can be extended to so many things. If let's say there are products that are produced by the people government doesn't like, For example, let's say a certain race is particularly known for producing textiles, for example. Then government says, okay, then we are banning the sale of this particular kind of textile for health reasons, whatever. They can invent a reason, and then everyone falls into it. So I'm not a supporter of that kind of thing where government tells people which products they can or can't buy, which is why I opposed it during the lockdown itself. It doesn't make any sense. It's arbitrary, and it has nothing to do with health, because if you want to deal with the health consequences of COVID-19, then you would adopt a risk management framework which would focus on activities, which would focus on profiling activities by their risk, not particular products. Like, if you think about it, it doesn't make sense, this idea that you have products that are riskier than others. That doesn't seem to make sense. What you really want is to separate people physically in stores, for example, to maintain physical distancing or social distancing. That's what you want to do, for people to wear masks and so on. So you use in that context, then it doesn't make any sense to then do all of this other stuff. And so I think it ends up being sort of considered malicious, because why are you banning these kinds of products? I mean, it does seem like they are banning the products they don't like tobacco. They've been there's a history here, so we can't just ignore the history. There have been repeated attempts over the years to introduce more and more restrictions on tobacco. Who can forget the attempts to introduce plain packaging, which the FMF was heavily involved in opposing, and so on. So there have been repeated attempts to go after this industry. Similarly, with alcohol, there have been repeated attempts to go after the alcohol industry. And who is to say that this is not government taking the opportunity to do something they've been wanting to do for a long time, which is basically to strangle this industry economically and make sure that it can't survive beyond the lockdown, and then basically achieve whatever goal is they want, because it doesn't seem to make sense why any government would reduce the potential tax revenue by destroying industries in their own country, but they are doing it. So we have to explain that fact. So even though it does seem to defy explanation. So I see my colleague Martin van Staren is in the live chat, and he is asking a question: does the prohibition of alcohol work? No, the prohibition of alcohol does not work, because the informal sector is more than willing to provide the alternative. Just to give you an example, when I went back home to Newcastle, went to Matadeni, which is a township, a lot of people were staying inside for some strange reason, where usually you would see people walking around all everywhere and going to their favorite spots, their favorite taverns, shebeens and so on. People were just staying inside for some reason, like it was deadly quiet. And then I got worried. So I think it was a Thursday when I went, and Thursday is one of those times when it's usually busy. So I asked my brother, and then obviously asked for cigarettes, and then he told me where we could get cigarettes, and then we went there, and then this lady had a back room, and it was a small little house, not more than 2 rooms, but they had a back room, and in the back room it was cramped. The door was slightly ajar because it was hot, so they were trying to get some ventilation, but the room itself was cramped with people, and they were deadly silent, but they were drinking. So she was running an underground shipping, harkening back to the days of apartheid, where such a sight was common, and a lot of people were commenting about that actually in the townships. A lot of people were saying that all of these measures, I mean the prohibitions on travel, on interprovincial travel, on all of these things, they basically remind them of those times. I mean they had to use the fact that you had to produce a permit again. So all of those things were not good signs. I don't think they were good for the government itself, because it has created a distrust in the law. It has made people less trusting of government and less willing to follow government's laws. I mean, I think this is particularly true in the case of alcohol, because government basically did a 180 here. After there was an expectation that of how these things would be done, even if there were to be a ban, I think there was a reasonable expectation. It wasn't written down or anything. And that's the thing about the law. It's not always written down. It includes the kind of expectations that people in society have. So among people, there was an expectation that before such a measure was adopted, there would be consultation at least, there would be discussion about it, there would be a request for comment or something like that. None of that was met. I mean, there wasn't even a warning. So in the previous lockdown, which is another thing, people have sort of had to adjust their expectations from the previous lockdown. So people were sort of expecting 1-2 days maybe of warning, enough to get to stock up on supplies. But no, none of that was forthcoming. Government just basically decided to implement this action unilaterally. So I think in future now people will be expecting this all the time, even if alcohol is legalized again. People will always be expecting an imminent ban, and they will never again people trust government. So I think that's what's going to keep the informal markets alive. This is what's going to keep the black markets alive for alcohol, for cigarettes, and for all of these other things, because people will no longer trust the government at all. They will, no matter what government says, like once you destroy, I think they need to understand that once you destroy trust in this way, you can never get it back. Once you destroy trust with your people, you can never get that back. It's lost forever. And they've done themselves some great harm here, and it might not. I think it might have an impact on the polls. I don't know about that. I mean, voting is something you never know what's going to happen. But I think it's reasonable to expect that it will have a major impact in terms of the respect for the law itself. Because people have seen that you cannot trust government to be reasonable when it comes to these things, and so this will affect other things, like it will affect their willingness to be compliant when it comes to taxes, when it comes to reporting your income. It will affect things like whether you choose to buy a cheaper informal illegal good, whereas before you might have chosen a more expensive legal good. But now there will be no compaction, and people have been made poorer by the lockdown itself, by the economic consequences thereof. And so so for example, if you were used to buying Stuyvesant before, then after the lockdown you've lost your job, you've experienced all of these moments with government where basically they've broken your trust. So now what are you going to do? Of course, if it's all you can afford, you will go for illegal cigarettes, or so-called illicit or so-called illegal cigarettes, but they're not really illegal. It's people engaged in voluntary trade with each other. But you will go for so-called illicit cigarettes, and it will just make the market that much bigger, and it will affect other things too, whether marijuana and so on. And there's another strange, interesting thing is talking to people, just like random people in the township. People are starting to talk of things that they would never have talked about before. Usually when you lost your job, you would talk about finding another job. You would talk about what kind of legal business I can start to get back on my feet. Now people are openly discussing whether I should start selling marijuana, because everyone knows, like, the simple fact that you can get it for so much, let's say in Msinga, and then you can sell it for 10 times more in Johannesburg. And so everyone now is talking about getting into those kinds of markets, because because there's a combination of two factors now. People have become poorer, and also at the same time the government has destroyed the trust in the law. And so this should continue, and among the informal sectors too, among the legal informal sector too, I think it will make everyone more reluctant to formalize their businesses. Because once you formalize your businesses, it means government now has power over you. It means they can shut you down. It means they can snoop into your records that are held by the banks and so on. They can seize your income and so on. They can know how much you earn. So once this proceeds, I should say, because this is not going to be over. We're going to deal with the consequences of this lockdown for years to come. Anyway. So it's going to create a disrespect for a law in general, because I think people know now. I think the trust has been lost. I mean, I think that the thing that really, in my mind, the thing that really killed apartheid was the loss of the respect for the law by the people, whether it was people in the townships defying the law, or people in the suburbs just basically also breaking the law, going to the townships, having black friends, things like for example, their attempts to try and force black and white people apart, from stop them from marrying each other, for example. That failed simply because people disrespect bad laws, and this is what's happening in South Africa. People have figured out that these are bad laws and they're disrespecting them. And I think that the process it's maybe instructive to think about how the process happens in people's minds. I think to a lot of people, how it happens is that you have an expectation in your mind. You think you have an expectation that following the law, doing what you're told is the right thing to do. That's what you were told at school, that you must just listen to your to higher authorities, obey when you are told. And so that's the expectation you have. And also you don't want to be a bad person, because there is social value in following the law. So you want the approval of everyone else. But government destroys that, undermines that by, first of all, turning the law against most of the people in society. So what the lockdown has done by the sweeping restrictions implemented during the lockdown, it has basically targeted every private individual in the country, and even public individuals. And so what has happened is that because all of these people have been targeted by the law, then there's a general loss of trust in the law among the citizen. And once once you have that, then it becomes, there's no longer any social pressure to follow the law, because there's no longer any sort of social shaming or negative consequences in not following the law, even by people who continue to follow the law. And so this is one of the factors that the government hasn't considered. And also the education, education is a powerful force. What you are taught over the 12 years from grade 1 to grade 12, and afterwards in university or wherever else you decide to go, what you are taught sticks with you for life. And so it's not an easy thing to break that sort of taught respect for authority. And if you can, but it does happen when people start to experience, when they start to feel the impact of government policy in their pockets. When you feel that government policy is making you poorer, it doesn't matter what you were taught in school. It doesn't matter that you were told that government does what is in the best of the citizenry. All of that doesn't matter. What matters to you is that you are being stopped from doing what is necessary to sustain your livelihood, and that's what breaks that hold that education might have over you, or should I say rather brainwashing. But that's a topic for another day. Anyway, thank you for joining me with my first live stream on my podcast for the Free Market Foundation. I know it's a bit. I was nervous myself. This is the first time, but it will get better. So I just hope that you enjoyed it, and yeah, tune in for the next one. Sure.